After 70 episodes, I've realized that living long and well comes down to three things: learning how to read the evidence, avoiding hype, and not letting perfectionism steal the joy from health. Evidence is the compass, hype is the detour, perfectionism is the parking brake. Hold on to those. We'll come back to them. Welcome, men of one nation. Today, I want to step back and ask a question I've been sitting on for a while now. After 2 years of episodes, and really after a lifetime of studying evidence, medicine, and what actually helps people, what have I really learned? What have I been trying to share with you? Not what's trendy or not what's getting headlines this month, but what, after all these years, actually matters if our goal is to live long and well. I think it starts here. Most of us don't want just a longer life. We want a better life. More years when we can think clearly, move well, stay independent, enjoy the people we love, and do the things that make life meaningful. So how do we get there? How do we make decisions that actually support that kind of life? For me, the answer keeps coming back to one word: evidence. Evidence is our compass. It helps us decide which direction is most likely to help when there are so many voices telling us so many different things. But this compass isn't always easy to read. Studies conflict, headlines overstate findings, experts disagree, and sometimes, often, what looks like evidence is really just a theory or an anecdote that feels like proof. So today is about one central question: How do we stay true to the evidence compass when it's not always easy to read? And to do that, we have to watch out for two things that pull us off course. Hype is the detour. It makes weak evidence feel strong. Perfectionism is the parking brake. Even when we're pointed in the right direction, trying to do everything perfectly makes the journey exhausting, like driving with the parking brake on. Something I've done more times than I wish I'd had to admit. So today, I want to work through three practical questions. How do we read the evidence compass more wisely? How do we recognize hype before it pulls us off course? And how do we follow the evidence without turning health into a full-time job? Let me tell you why evidence matters so much to me. It's my passion, my life's work, and honestly, what gets me out of the bed most mornings. It's why I do this podcast. There's someone close to me who for years would make health claims that made my hair stand on end when I had hair. She'd say things like, breast cancer survivors should never eat chocolate because it will cause the cancer to come back. Or you must eat sauerkraut to protect your microbiome. Or never touch receipts at the grocery store or boarding passes at the airport because the thermal paper has chemicals that will change your endocrine system and your fertility. And when I'd ask, what's the evidence? The answer was usually, I read it somewhere, or it was in the New York Times, or my friend's cousin's doctor told her. What gets me upset wasn't the claim itself. Look, I understand that we can all get excited or frightened by something we read. What bothered me was the certainty, an almost religious conviction that what she'd heard was true and had to be acted on, completely resistant to any discussion of the actual evidence. Now, this bothered me 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and still does today. And look, she's not alone. I have genuine sympathy for people who are suffering and looking for answers, because traditional medicine often doesn't give them one. But I get absolutely crazy when experts try to convince those people that they have the way, when it's almost never based on evidence, which is exactly why we need the compass. Evidence isn't perfect, but it gives us a way to ask, is this actually supported, or does it just feel true? Most of my professional life was built around that question. What does the evidence actually justify? When is a test or treatment or drug truly worth using? What should doctors do because it generally would help a patient? What should the health system pay for because it creates real value? I spent decades working inside those questions in managed care, in the pharmaceutical industry, electronic health records, health policy, and I published more than 180 peer-reviewed articles because I wanted to separate what sounds persuasive from what is actually supported. My career was largely about helping people read the compass. Not because evidence is perfect, it isn't. But without it, we're much more likely to follow whichever claim sounds most convincing. I hated seeing patients undergo tests they didn't need or receive treatments not likely to help, especially when those resources could have gone toward care that was actually evidence-based. And eventually I realized the same problem was everywhere in wellness and longevity. People were being offered tests, supplements, therapies, and protocols that sounded scientific and hopeful and convincing, but the evidence, frankly, just wasn't there. That brought me right back to the family story, because whether it's someone close to me repeating a claim with absolute certainty, or someone online selling a protocol with the same confidence, the problem is the same. People who genuinely want to be healthier get pulled towards ideas that feel true but aren't well supported. That upsets me. People's hope, time, money, and health are at stake. That's why I started the podcast. A good example of how the evidence compass works and changes is heart disease. For years, we thought of stable coronary artery disease as a plumbing problem. Artery narrowed, open it up. Sounds logical, feels intuitively correct. Then the randomized trials came in and they forced us to think again. In the COURAGE trial, patients with stable coronary disease who received angioplasty did not have fewer deaths or heart attacks than patients who received good medical therapy alone. The ischemia trial taught us something similar. These procedures weren't more effective than treating the underlying risk factors aggressively. Now, that doesn't mean procedures never matter. Of course they do. But for many people with stable heart disease, the compass shifted. Less towards fix the plumbing and more towards blood pressure, activity, sleep, metabolic health, and those same factors matter for cognitive decline too. The evidence keeps pointing at the same things. So how do we read that compass ourselves? When you hear a health claim, ask a few basic questions. Was this tested in a randomized trial where people were actually assigned to a intervention and compared to a control group? Or was it an observational study where researchers noticed that people who did one thing tended to have better outcomes? How large was the study? Has it been repeated? Is there a meta-analysis summarizing the broader evidence? And most importantly, did the study measure something that actually matters? Did people live longer, have fewer heart attacks, think better, function better? Or did only a lab value change? A biomarker, like a lab value, is not an outcome. Changing a number on a blood test is not the same as helping somebody feel better. Those questions don't make the compass perfectly clear, but they help us read it. One more nuance worth sitting with. Even when the compass points in a reasonably clear direction, the evidence tells us what happens on average. But you're not the average person, neither am I. That's where the N of one approach comes in. Take melatonin and sleep. A meta-analysis of randomized trials found that melatonin improved how quickly people fall asleep, total sleep time, and sleep quality. But the average benefit was modest, a few minutes. Now, that average effect may be small, but how you respond might be larger, smaller, or non-existent. So pick one change. Try melatonin or earlier meals, a cooler bedroom, less alcohol before bed. Decide what you'll measure, data from an Oura ring, a smartwatch, or just how rested you feel in the morning. Give it a reasonable amount of time. Then ask honestly, did it help? And if the answer is yes, try stopping it. See if the problem comes back. Then restart and see if things improve again. That stop and restart approach gives you much more confidence than the change is really helping. Because the change could just coincide with something else going on in your life. I have a whole episode on N of one assessments. So it's a really powerful tool when used carefully. The dilemma, of course, is that evidence isn't always easy to judge. And that's exactly where hype enters. It's the detour because it pulls us away from the compass. Hype lives in the gap between what sounds evidence-based and what actually is. And hype is dangerous because it rarely looks foolish at first. It may sound scientific. It may come from someone credentialed. It may offer a clear explanation when you're desperately seeking one. It makes you feel proactive and hopeful. But if the claim isn't well supported, you may spend money, time, emotional energy, and hope on something unlikely to help. And you may delay or ignore the steps that would have made a real difference. Let me give you a concrete example. Mitochondrial health. Mitochondria are real. They matter. They help produce energy in our cells. So when someone says fatigue, aging, or brain fog is really a mitochondrial problem, the story sounds plausible, compelling even. And this is where hype starts to build. On the supply side, the people promoting these ideas, they're often financial incentives, supplements to sell, testing, protocols, online courses. Now, I don't think hype always comes from people knowingly selling nonsense. Sometimes they genuinely believe it. They've seen patients improve. They have a theory that makes sense to them. They built a practice, a product, a professional identity around it. But believing what you sell doesn't mean it works. And the message gets packaged in ways that sound persuasive. A credentialed expert says it, so it must be true. That's an appeal to authority, A patient tells a powerful story, so the treatment must work. That's an anecdote being treated as proof. The product is natural, so it must be safer. That's an appeal to nature. Now let's look at the receiving side, us. Many people have real symptoms and real frustration. Fatigue, brain fog, poor sleep, pain, digestive problems, a persistent sense that something isn't right. And maybe conventional medicine hasn't given them a satisfying answer. When that happens, we become susceptible to a whole set of cognitive biases. Confirmation bias makes us notice evidence that supports what we want to believe and ignore what contradicts it. Social proof makes us think, hey, if so many people are doing this, there must be something to it. And the halo effect makes us trust someone's claim because they look fit, sound confident, or have expertise in a related area. So now the mitochondrial story has everything hype needs. A plausible biological mechanism, a credentialed expert, compelling anecdotes, a clear supplement or protocol, and the promise of agency, the feeling that you can do something about this. When all those forces come together, weak evidence can feel much stronger than it is. The DETOUR is designed to be appealing. And here's where we come back to the compass. What's the actual evidence? Do rigorous clinical trials show that people with fatigue or brain fog get better when we treat supposed mitochondrial dysfunction? Or are we mostly seeing changes in biomarkers and hearing stories that sound compelling? For most mitochondria and NAD-related claims, the evidence is not where the hype suggests it is. Some supplements change NAD-related blood tests, but credible evidence that they improve meaningful outcomes like aging, fatigue, wellness just isn't there. Changing a biomarker is not the same as helping a person feel better, function better, or live longer. So, how do we avoid the detour? First, pause. Hype usually wants urgency. Buy now. Believe now. Test now. Slow down. Second, follow the money. Who benefits if you believe this? Now, that doesn't automatically make the claim wrong, but it should make you more careful. Third, look for the hype equation. Is there a cool biologic mechanism, a credentialed expert, compelling anecdotes, a promise of control? The more of those pieces you see together, the more cautious you should be. Fourth, name the reasoning trap. Is a story being treated as proof? Is a mechanism being offered as evidence? Is an expert opinion substituting for data? And finally, check your own mind. Am I believing this because the evidence is strong or because the story is satisfying and I really need an answer? That's how we avoid the detour, not by becoming cynical, by returning to the compass. Now, the third piece. Even if we read the compass better and dodge the obvious detours, there's still one more thing working against us, that parking brake. If we take the evidence seriously, we quickly find there's a lot it supports. Exercise more, sleep better, eat better, manage stress, build stronger relationships, control blood pressure, improve cholesterol, drink less alcohol, track this, measure that. Now, many of those things are genuinely worthwhile, but if we try to do all of them all the time perfectly, health becomes all-consuming. Voltaire said it, the great is the enemy of the good. He was on to something. If you try to do every single thing that might possibly improve your health, it'd be a full-time job. And then something ironic happens. In trying so hard to protect life, we lose touch with how to enjoy it. Exercise is a good example. It reduces the risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cognitive decline, falls, and premature death. The evidence on this is about as strong as it gets. But here's what actually the data show. The largest gains go to sedentary people who start taking regular brisk walks. Going from nothing to something produces dramatic benefit. Going from a lot to more, the marginal return drops off significantly. A vigorous 20 to 30-minute walk most days captures most of the benefit. Doubling or tripling that's fine, but it doesn't further reduce mortality nearly as much as you might expect. That's the parking brake lesson. The goal isn't to perfect every detail. The goal is to do enough of the high-value things to actually matter. The 80-20 principle applies here. 80% of the benefit from 20% of the effort, also called the Pareto principle, for those of you who are keeping score on this. Some changes produce large returns. Exercise is one. Meaningfully improving very poor sleep is another. Reducing alcohol from 2 drinks a day to 1, not necessarily 0, just 1. These moves for the right person can be significant. But if you're already doing a fair bit in those areas, pause, congratulate yourself, then honestly ask, at what cost? Cost in time, cost in joy. Life is always a balance of benefits and costs. More isn't always better. Sometimes good enough is exactly right. So what should you do? Choose the few actions most likely to matter for you specifically. Ask where you'll get the biggest return. If you're inactive, start with movement. If sleep is poor, work on sleep. If blood pressure is high, address it. If alcohol is clearly affecting your sleep, your mood, your weight, your relationships, reduce it and make the plan sustainable. A good plan you can actually follow beats a perfect plan you abandon. So, after 70 episodes, here's what I've learned. How do we use evidence more wisely? We treat it as a compass. Not always easy to read, but essential for staying oriented. How do we recognize hype before it pulls us off course? We slow down, look for the hype equation, and remember that a compelling story is not the same as proof. How do we pursue health without turning it into a full-time job? We focus on what matters most, make it sustainable, and leave room for joy. A family member I mentioned at the beginning, she's still at it, still reading things somewhere, still holding on to them with absolute certainty. And I still find it maddening. But she's not the exception. She's the norm. Most of us are looking for answers, and the world is full of people happy to sell us ones that don't hold up. That's why the compass matter. That's why I keep doing this. Follow the compass, watch for the detours, and release the parking brake. Health matters enormously, but it's not the destination. It's what keeps us living the life we actually want to live.